So we're back to our presentations. Welcome back. So we have two more presentations today. More on the social aspect, psychological and environmental, sociological and psychological aspect of clean IT. So first we will have Aurore, who's going to talk to us about acceptance and psychological aspects. And then Thomas is going to talk about the social aspect. So Aurore, I'll hand you the presentation. You can start whenever you want.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So now my presentation will cover some concepts from psychology and social psychology to try to explain a little bit more why do users might resist or lack acceptance when you want to implement, some changes. Just for you to know that this is actually like the continuity of our Behave project. Last year, we conducted a seminar also with a multidisciplinary approach. And at that time, we had a colleague presenting on the psychological insight in general in the sector related to sustainability and sustainable object and software. Today, the focus is a bit more specific on user acceptance or resistance. So it's really complementary if you had assisted to this seminar last year. All right, so the idea today is to try to explain basically, my computer won't work. Yes, how we can explain with some social psychological mechanisms lack of involvement from users, lack of interest, lack of acceptance, maybe a resistance to change, which is a bit more complex and stronger than just lack of interest or acceptance. Inertia, for example, also. No will to go for or no will to go against. This might be some phenomenon that you have already observed, faced in one of your experiments of study. So today we will try to bring some explanations and maybe some solutions on how to overcome that. So I will cover basically three phenomenon, three broad explanations from a social psychology to shed some lights on that. So the first aspects from social psychology that I would like to mention relates to the conflict of values and cognitive dissonance that users might experience when they are involved in your studies. So here, if you observe user lack of interest, lack of involvement, or lack of acceptance, it might simply be because users do not feel compelled to act or to change the practices because it does not, they do not find an echo in their own values. So here, overall, from what I've heard from you, from what you work on, I understand that your research and maybe your own values relates more to frugality, to sustainability, and in general, what we call slower, right? So we are going to give example after that. But maybe the users that you target and of which you want to change practices, they may have values more related to, we can say also materialisms, performance, high-tech, novelty, and everything related to what we will call a faster. To give a more precise example here, not related to IT, but on purpose to give a classic idea of that. We have this notion of slow fashion versus fast fashion. And the idea here is to say that the marketing and big companies have, let's say, put the idea in customers' minds that being fashionable means a changing clothes regularly and, let's say, really quickly. Sometimes initially every season, sometimes every month, not to say every week, depending on the brands. So we have let's say, arrived to this a notion of fast fashion and with obviously a terrible impact on the environment. And the idea that to be fashionable is to change often, to have many options also, and not to keep something for a very long time. So on the contrary, obviously, sustainability has tried to slow down a bit things and make people think about their habits, their way of life, and say it doesn't mean that you are fashionable if you change your product every few weeks or every month. These are two very different concepts. And this is something that we have forgotten because of the marketing message that was definitely promoted by company for a long time. So slow fashion definitely says that we can be fashionable with products that are kept longer, that are more environmentally friendly, usually that also are designed with less colors, less complexity to have a lower impact on the environment already in the production, and also with materials that are easier to recycle, right? So really this opposition between what is fast and what is slow. And we observe that also in the general theory in economics, or in paradigms of lives, for instance, with the degrowth theory, the idea that we have to slow down to be more sustainable. But this developing from specific sectors might have also overlap in other domains. So, for example, in IT, we might find this idea also that consumers might think, or users might think, that a being, let's say, in or fashionable is having more performing equipment, changing them more regularly, and so on. And if you do not so, then you might not be fashionable. All right. And this question of materialism, materiality is still strongly, let's say, integrated by many people. And the issue that we have with the concept of values is that values are hard to change because they have been built in childhood, and they normally stay stable over time. So values are guiding principles that help us take decisions, but we cannot change values easily. What we can change easily, it's what we call attitudes or beliefs, let's say opinions on something, whether it is environmentally friendly or not environmentally friendly, and so on. But values is really hard to change. And here we are talking about decades of work of marketing services and big companies to change this paradigm in consumers' mind. So with our work in research and so on, it's really hard to, when we face, let's say, opposing value, contradictory value with our goals, because this is not something that we will be able to change with one experiment. And this is actually why governments integrate sustainable development and environmental questions now in educative programs, because they need to change the value systems of the new generation of citizens coming, that is the kids basically, and try to change also values of their families indirectly. All right, so that there's really a long-term, let's say, running, but definitely if you face this in experiments, try not to face this value to go really upfront, because you might not be able to change practices, but maybe try to find attitudes or beliefs that support your objectives, your research objectives, on which the consumer can hold on to, and try to follow your objectives and change their practices based on that. All right. We have many different cognitions in psychology. Some are very long lasting, and others are more short lasting and easier to change in the short term. So maybe you want to focus more on those, so that the customers or the users have something that they can hold on to follow your objectives of your research. Another thing here that might be of interest for you to understand that, related obviously to the values, it's what we call prospect theory. Prospect theory is very interesting because it explains that when you have the same amount of gains and loss, for instance, 10 euros that you might gain and 10 euros that you might lose, people absolutely do not react the same way, whether it is about gaining or whether it is about losing, right? People might be happy about losing 10 euros, but they might be very, very upset or sad about losing 10 euros. And this is not obviously reasonable normally, at least in the mind of traditional economics. Normally, you should react the same positively to a gain or negatively to a loss in the extent that it is the same amount. And this is not what is happening. And this is maybe something that might be of interest for you, because it means that when you ask user to accept, for instance, a reduction in the design of a product or in the speed of a program or software or anything, what the loss that you ask them to accept is actually felt as much superior to the equivalent gain in design, in speed that you could offer them. So it's not actually asking the same. When you ask for a loss or an acceptance in the reduction of something, you actually ask for much more in this quantity of loss that you could offer in gains. If there is anything that is not clear in how I explain, or if you have any question, obviously at the end of the presentation we can come back to any concept, right? But it's really the idea that from the moment you ask people to accept degrowth or accept less or to go slower, it's really hard, because people really feel that they are losing much more than when they had been gaining so far. Okay. This concept of slow and fast that is mentioned here in fashion is actually also something that you might find in food when we have slow food and fast food. With the idea of slow food is that you really pay more attention to what you eat. You try to eat with products that are grown and transformed more locally, and so on and so on. So it's really not only in fashion, but it's really something that you can see in many domains, and that I think might ring a bell for you with what you can observe in the IT sector. All right, so maybe here's something that an example of let's say a concept, a business concept that is trying to reconcile this notion of fast and slow and sustainability and materialism. I think it's back market, right? Because they have been able, with their initiative and their let's say business model, to try to change the paradigm in consumers' mind and make them accept that being sustainable might also work with having highly performing and high technology equipment. All right, it does not need to be that opposite. So we definitely need more example of like this one to make people understand that, you know, this previous message make totally built by marketing, it's not true, and that we can absolutely reconcile sustainability and performance and design and whatever it is, which is maybe obvious for you, but definitely not obvious for the majority of people or customers. And here, a last concept in this first subject is what we called cognitive dissonance. And that was when I was mentioning values, attitudes, and beliefs, you might understand it better here. Basically, when people hold some values and they behave differently, they might experience inconsistency between what they believe in and how they behave. And this makes them feel what we call cognitive dissonance. It means that people are not comfortable with whether how they behave or with what they think, because the two are not compatible. And actually, we're not made to accept this inconsistency. Humans actually like to have consistent behavior with their values. So basically, there are two solutions here. We need to change the behavior, or we need to change the value. Something that we can do also is to change the perception of behavior. And that's definitely something that is happening with what I mentioned on the message given by marketing on what is progress, what is performance, and so on. And actually, what we try now to change with sustainability to say that performance is definitely compatible with sustainability and so on. So we try to change the perception of the behavior to erase basically decades of work of marketing services and so on, and make people understand that. So we can change values, but that is definitely a long-term process. What we can change is attitudes or beliefs, which are, again, easier to change. What people can do is change the behavior. And when you observe, for instance, lack of interest, lack of involvement, or resistance to change, it means that the people do not want to change their values, to change their attitudes or their beliefs. So what they do is that they actually act on the behavior to resist to change the behaviors, because they cannot change the values to be aligned with that. So we need to find something, either to find a belief or an attitude to be aligned with the behavior that you want them to adopt, or we can change the perception of the behavior. And this, when we find something, values of the behavior to change, then people experience again consonance, and so they feel again, whole and satisfied, and no tension, no cognitive tension is on the way. So this is something. So you see the reference, right? It's from 1957. So it's something that psychologists have known for a very long time. And yet, in practice, we do observe a lot of cognitive dissonance still. So it's definitely something that happens a lot that we might not be aware of, but can definitely jeopardize very quickly and easily any experimental studies that do not understand well those mechanisms. All right, so that was on our first subject on basically cognitive mechanisms. Now we are going to talk about more a social phenomenon, and especially the notion of identity, social identity. I do not know whether you have heard about this already, so I hope that this will bring some new insights to you. Going in the same direction than the previous section, we have this idea that people acting for the environment, sustainability, and so on, still represent the minority of the population, and that in the majority of the population does not take enough action to change the practices and to change things and so on. The issue that we have here is the fact that actually, again, humans usually prefer to be associated with the majority group, because being part of the minority usually means being part of a marginal group. Here, if you want more visual understanding of that, it means being marginal, it means going against the dominant social norms. So this is very complicated then to inspire and motivate people to change their practices, because they do not want to go against the majority, the dominant social group. And this is all related to a social process of a construction of our self-concept, because actually every one of us is related to different social groups, whether it is because of your work, whether it is because of your personal interest in your private life. You might also feel that you have a parent identity, a son identity, and so on, all right? So all of those identities, depending on how you build and see your self-concept, of yourself, basically, all of these definitely impact your decisions. And this is why the European Union and France at the national level have been changing regulations and have been implementing all of those awareness campaigns and so on, because it's also to make people understand that the objective is to make the majority become the one supporting sustainability, so that people do not feel that they are going against the social norm because they are part of the majority group. And this is explaining a lot of conflict and resistance to change in society, in sustainability, but in any other domain, actually. So in the case that actually your group of a target of population does actually represent the minority group, what you can do is use dynamic social norms. Because what you cannot do is lie in an experiment or in a study and make them believe that they are already part of a majority group. because transparency is key. And if you base your information on a lie, you definitely jeopardize your study and the effort in this area. So you definitely need to be transparent and to say the truth. So if your target population is still part of the minority group, we have this new tool of the dynamic social norms, which is to show the real life changing, the actual changes in the people going from the minority group to the majority group. And that means that the people will see that the trend is towards sustainability, because sustainability is becoming the majority group. So people, even if they're not part of the majority group yet, they want to be part of this trend and change also their behavior to follow the social norms, which is of shifting to the dominant paradigm of sustainability to become one of the majority group. So this is a solution that is already, I know, in use in the IT sector and works well because of these notions of minority majority groups, and also because of this notion of identity. It works because people identify with these groups and they care for it. If the group, the target social groups is not part of the self-concept of the person, then the mechanisms cannot work. It really works because it's part of their identity, of the self-concept. So you might want also to try to make sure that it could work because it's relevant for your target population identity. Definitely in Europe, the regulatory and cultural context have helped this kind of tools. But when we think about Latin America, Africa, and Asia, I do know quite well Latin America, and there you do not have this supporting cultural or regulatory context. So it's really more difficult to make those changes. In Europe, we definitely have a favorable context. So if you want to go, for example, to study cross-cultural studies or try to develop practices in other areas, you might definitely want to look into that and see whether it is possible to use this. All right, and our third subject is related to what we called a behavioral control. Actually, you might observe users show resistance to change to your practices, but also anywhere. I mean, in any changes happening in your organization, whether it is your university or your company. Sometimes institutionally they want to implement changes and people might resist. So you can observe that also definitely in real life. So we resist because usually we do not know that a change is intended and that we have to change practices. We might resist because we do not understand the new practice or the objective, the goal of changing the practices. Because sometimes it looks like it won't do better, it won't work, it has no sense, and so on. So we do not understand the change, so why be part of it? We might resist also because we do not agree with it, whether it is for political reason or for scientific motives or whatever it is, but because we do not agree with it. We might also have been set aside or rejected for it. For instance, if you are the expert in one area in your company or industry and you see that they are making a big change in your area and you have not been consulted or be part of it, well, you might feel, the will to resist to it because you do not understand, if you are the expert in that, why you were not involved to help make it better, right? Also, we might resist because we feel threatened by it, whether it is, for instance, our job position or our social status compared to colleagues, that it might change definitely the relationship that we have with other people. Or also, in other cases, it might definitely threaten our property or whatever. So those are many possible reasons. There might be more, but basically, people do not resist change per se. It doesn't mean anything to resist change. It's not that people are lazy and they do not want to do anything. It's just because they do not see the goal in it, they do not agree with it, they are not part of it, and so on. But resisting the change per se does not mean much. There is always a reason behind. So I suggest a simple, let's say, summary in that we resist because we do not care, we have not been involved, or we feel threatened, whether it is physically or socially. And if you can overcome these three aspects, you have definitely more chances to involve your customers, your target population, your users, or whoever it is you target. But basically, those are three important questions that you need to solve when you want to involve people in your studies and experiments. And something that is really interesting is the involvement of users from the very beginning. So what you can do is make them part of the solution from the moment you start brainstorming about the issue, the solutions. It's to involve them, to understand better first on how they experiment the issues, what does it mean for them, and how you can implement solution and which solutions could be best received by them. All right. And from the moment you make someone part of the process and you make them feel that it's also their baby, their project, their property, I mean, right. So you definitely can count on more of their motivation in that, because it might involve their own self-concept, their identity, and they're part of it. So they definitely want to go until the end of the project and see it come true, basically. So this in the user involvement definitely works a lot. And this is something, again, marketing has understood very early. And that is why you see all those possibilities of personalizing your product and choosing the last features and so on, because by that, they involve customers in the production process or personalizing process of products, and consumers become more loyal to the brands and they buy again, and they also become ambassadors of the brand. So this is actually something that you already see in your everyday life. And this is something that maybe researchers in the social sciences do a bit more when they involve qualitative methods of data analysis. But if you have researchers targeting only quantitative methods of a data approach and empirical approach, then usually it's harder to involve the users if you only work in a quantitative with a quantitative approach. Another solution also to try to overcome resistance to change is to encourage commitment. This is slightly different from involvement, because actually what you are going to do is to involve gradually the person. So what you want to do is basically the commercial technique of putting the foot in the door, what they say, how they call this technique. And you want them to make a small commitment, something really easy, and then you can ask for something more difficult, right? So maybe it's at the beginning a very simple question, and then you ask them to be part of a workshop, and then part of a more complex discussion in your project to be part of the solution, and so on. So you start with something very, very easy, and then you can gradually increase the difficulty of the commitment that you ask the person. Because if you start from something very complex at the beginning, it's more easily for the person, for the target population, to say no at first, because it's too costly to accept, costly in efforts, costly in time, and so on. So it's easier to say no, because they can tell you that because no, I don't have time, I don't know about that, or whatever it is. But if you start with something very easy and not costly, then they're already involved in it. And not only it's less costly for them to say yes to the next step, but also you involve the second strategy, the user involvement process. And it's more appealing for them, that more satisfactory. than just to accept, but then do not believe in the final goal of your project. The idea is still to make them part of it and embrace your project in the extent that is possible, obviously. And the last concept here, the last notion that I wanted to comment today is what we call perceived behavioral control. And this is something that is used a lot in psychological studies, because actually sometimes you ask people, and when I say you, I say any researchers, right? We ask people to make a certain behavior, make a certain decision, but actually, many people do not feel entitled or do not feel that that their actions have actually an impact in what you want to achieve. They do not believe that their action, their efforts will have a positive impact in the whole project that you are actually leading. So the idea is to make them understand how their participation is necessary, whether it is very a small part of it or because you need people to change, also make them a snowball effect, and bringing each time more people involved in the project, because this person has a power decision that has a strong impact on many other aspects of the downstream chain, and so on and so on. So you can have many explanations here, but the idea is to be very transparent about the whole process of your project or the goal that you want to achieve, and make sure that the users or the persons involved find their place in it and understand that if they are part of this project, they will help the things change, basically. And if they are not part of it, it will make a strong barrier for the achievement of the project. So that's all related, but different notions, obviously. The idea is really to empower them to understand that they have an impact, not only because they care for it or because you ask them to do so and they want to be nice with you, but really because they understand that their actions are going to have some impact. And in that, I can mention, for instance, a study I conducted in Latin America, in Argentina precisely, where we have a lot of difficulty to change behaviors, especially regarding environmental behavior at homes, recycling, and so on, because people do not believe in the system, in the political system, and do not believe that their waste is actually recycled, that government actually care for the environment. So they don't want to change because they don't understand that the action actually have an impact. So this is something that you might really want to be transparent about and explain users or the target population how it is actually happening in your project. All right, so I hope that this was not too much information, that you might find some utility in all of that for your research. If you have any question, obviously I'm available. It's actually just to raise some awareness regarding this issue, but if you do not have any question, it's no big deal. It was just to bring some psychological insights into all the phenomena that you might face in your research. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aurore. If there's any questions, I suggest you go to the microphone up there so she can see you when you ask your question. Okay, go ahead.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I have two questions. Have you looked at the difference in let's say the regional differences? We can see that, for example, people from the countries of north of Europe are more, let's say, sensitive to environmental subjects than the south of Europe, for example. And the second question is another kind of users, especially in a private company like mine. You look at the specific behavior of managers inside a company, especially when there is a good messages at the higher level, but strangely it's difficult to have the good pyramid. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for the questions. For the first one, actually, you do have a lot of information on national surveys, whether it is between North Europe, South Europe, or everywhere in the world. You do have many results on that, with the state basically of environmental awareness in some areas and so on. So this data is actually already existing. You can find results on that, and it's usually also related to different things also here. General culture, the orientation, the value orientation of the general culture, whether it is oriented, for instance, to materialism, individualism, and so on, it definitely have an impact on the environmental behaviors of the population. But it's also related to the identities. For instance, how strong you identify with friends or with your region, and you will actually be more likely to act and adopt, for instance, environmental behaviors if you understand that climate change and all the environmental, let's say, negative events happening now can actually threaten your region that you care about. And through the identity, you can involve person when you make them understand that things that they care about are threatened to, not only their own self. So you do have many information about that. If you need any more precise information, obviously I can share it with you. And on your second question, I'm really happy that you asked that, because that is definitely the heart of my studies, what I investigate. And the role of managers in a company is very interesting, because they do have the challenge of transmitting the message of the general policies of the top management to every employees, and make employees embrace the change and integrate this, whether it is integrated in the job position or whether it is based on voluntary actions. So they do have a very challenging position within the company. And usually what we observe is that employees are more likely to change their behaviors when they have a good relationship with the managers, or when they identify with the organization. It means that when you care about the organization and you really feel that this is what we call a social group that you identify with, that you say, for instance, we, my organization, and I, that you really, for instance, if there is something bad published in the press, you feel bad because you think that is also part of you that has been, exposed in the press in this way. So if this happens, it means that you are highly identified with the organization. And in this case, if the organization, top management, or your manager says that they want to act for the environment and recommends everybody to act for the environment, then employees are more likely to do it, because it's relevant for the organization, it's relevant for them, for their self-concept. So it's kind of fulfilling for them. It's a kind of self-realization to contribute to the objective of the organization. So, and if they're not identified with the organization, if they do not care much about the organization, they are less likely to actually embrace the changes and involve in those behaviors that you recommend, which is an issue that we observe with the new generations of students and then workers that stay very little in companies, and every few years they change companies and they do not stay loyal as what we could observe before in older generations of workers, because it's harder to involve them based on their relationship with the organization. So here you have to try to target their environmental values or something that is still appealing to their identity, but maybe not through the organization. So I do have a lot of ideas and materials on that, so we can definitely continue the discussion afterwards, but I hope at least that this brings some answers.
Thank you. Another question?
Yes, thank you a lot. So you're basically reverting in the right direction the toolkit that is called psychological operations, that hit the UK and the US in 2016 with Cambridge Analytica. Thank you. I wanted to say that David Mayamba-Kitoko that we mentioned with Gael says that he really hopes that environmental regulation be a factor to like lessen the war on resources, because nobody cares about Black people dying in Africa. This is his words. But they do care about environmental policy if they think it hurts them. So yeah, again, thank you. I'm worried though, so this is my question, because I see sometimes adverse effects, you know, like, I don't know, these days political mindsets are changing very fast. And so although I believe that making this change, making people eager to embrace environmental values is important, don't you fear that this can be reverted in a glimpse? Because that's my fear.
Because of political agenda, you mean?
I see, to me, it looks like a value change that's very fast. I must be wrong, but I hope I'm wrong. You see, because you said that values were very slow to change.
Yeah.
So what could explain that sometimes the political situation is developing very fast in a direction, and how could it change?
They're not using the same tools. Value change is a process that has started like 30 years ago in Europe when they started to change the environmental regulation. It has been very progressive, and then you know, they are implementing more and more awareness campaign and so on. But what you observe is this rapid changes in political agenda regulation. They are going in the right way now, but it's not values that make people behave in the way that you want them to do. It's basically, in many cases, from what I can observe from a management field, it's basically money. Because of regulation, banks finance certain products that have a positive environmental impact and so on. So the banks and customers and so on, they do not change the behaviors because of sustainability or whatever. It's because they won't get the loan if they do not have a sustainability impact. So this is a tool that government can use also to force people to change. It's basically changing the regulation. So they're doing here basically the other way around, because awareness is very long process, and they're not reaching their objective. This is the international sustainability objective. So they have to go faster and force people to change. But what we can hope from the psychological field is the fact that once you make people behave in a certain way, again, this question of cognitive dissonance, maybe they do not have the value or belief supporting sustainability. But once they have started to adopt sustainable behaviors, they need this consonance again. They need to establish the equilibrium between the two. So they might, and also for rational consistency of behaving in one way and thinking the other way. So when you are forced to behave in a certain way, well, you have to change your beliefs, and at some point, maybe in the long term, your values to be consistent with your behaviors. The general tendency in Europe is that it will stay in this path. I'm definitely less sure about United States or other regions in the world, but in Europe, I'm pretty confident that it won't change that soon, or not that radically.
Thanks a lot.
No problem.
One question. Yeah, go ahead. The microphone there.
Yeah, just a follow-up question. I'm just wondering who you really think are the agents of change that can provoke positive change. So you said it's regulations, so it's governments, most probably. So I get that from your answer, from your presentation, I thought it's companies. So I'm wondering who can really trigger change.
Everybody. Actually, in sustainability, we definitely need the involvement of everybody. I don't know how much you are interested in all the COP and international summits, but at first it was only a state meeting. Soon they have involved companies, and in the 90s already they involved NGOs, and media, because they understood that the change is only possible if you involve everybody. So you have to involve the three, what we call the three, let's say, sectors in society: government, companies, and the social sector through NGOs. And NGOs do a lot of very good work to change, to lobby, to change regulation, to change, to conduct awareness campaign, and so on and so on. Especially in countries when political will is lacking, NGOs usually take the lead and achieve a lot of positive change. So it depends on the situation, it depends on the scale, but usually you will see the action of the three. And the Davos forum, the Davos meeting definitely shows that big companies also try to be part of the solutions, because it strengthens their business models. Sorry.
Yeah, we just had that discussion in the lunch break, and I was just reporting, at least from Germany, and probably it's in other countries as well, that the momentum, for example, that we have with Fridays for Future and so on is just gone. So I feel like there is a backlash, actually. It's not only progressing in one direction, it can actually go backwards. It's at least my feeling and my perception right now. I don't know.
Yeah, but that's the positive things of being all together involved, because if, for instance, the companies go backwards, then you have the social society and governments, to put the limits and say, no, you cannot go back that far away. So it's and actually, for instance, corporate social responsibility has been built over time by a game of back and forth between public sector initiatives and private sector initiatives. And what we have achieved today, it's because when scandals happen or lack of will happened in one side, then the other one was here to say, no, you need to improve on those aspects. So historically, it's actually the balance between mainly private sector and public sector, but more recently also the increasing influencing power of the social sector that makes us actually progress towards sustainability. So I don't think if only one side is looking backward, it will be enough. I think the balance between the three makes things move forward still.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any question remotely or? Okay, thank you very much, Aurore.